Everybody jump in here. Where's the buttons? Yep. Like everybody joined and left. There they are. They're coming back. It's probably Paul from his phone and browser and his other browser. Yeah, 17 browsers. He's trying to inflate our numbers today.
browser.
Give him another minute. All right. Cool. Oh, you know what? Forgot our other branding.
There you go.
Yep. All right. I got to figure out how to turn the music off. When you don't have Paul around, this gets difficult. Here's the button. All right. Okay. Yes. Okay. All right. We're going to get started. Welcome to Atomics on a Friday. We have a new guest. We have Justin today, filling in for Paul. Paul's out, so we get to fill in, but this is going to be fun. So yeah, we'll just jam in. We got a kind of a packed agenda. Do the intros, and we're going to dive into atomic test harnesses, which I think is not as widely known. So I'm excited to share a lot more about those and just technique variances and whatnot. And we talked about Justin, MSI exec, and I think we may attempt to dive into like service creations and drivers and whatnot. But yeah, we're just riddled with a lot of content today. So yeah, Michael Haig, part of the gang here for Atomics on a Friday, and I'd introduced Paul, but he's not here, so I don't think he gets a proper introduction. But I'll let Justin go ahead and introduce yourself, sir.
Justin Elzy, CTO at TrustedSec. What that probably means for this is I'm over the red team and the research team there, so probably have some perspectives on MSIs and things that work, don't work, and all that.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to have you here today. All the viewers are. Yes, the real beard. Yes. It looks like we got someone asking about this Justin person on the channels here, so we'll just let it go. Yeah, so we got a lot of content. I think ultimately I might just share the screen and we just jump into this. But I wanted to show at least a little bit on atomic test harnesses. You know, what are they, kind of where they optically came from for defenders, but also like for our conversation today, like with MSI and maybe other things that we have here that come with atomic test harnesses. You know, there's a lot, all the variations on that. So obviously the idea with ATH is, you know, pick a technique and dive into it very deep and come out with like a test harness that has potentially all the different variations to execute that technique. The nice part out of this tool compared to like Atomic Red Team is that it actually kind of gives you a success failure and also a GUID. So if you were to like ship this down range, you could search on GUID or like a very like specific pattern, which makes it nice, as you know, compared to if you were just using Atomic Red Team. Random, Justin, do you guys use Atomic Red Team?
So we don't. We have you know, a bunch of playbooks and things we do that are usually one-off. I think a lot of what we do is tuning stuff for particular environments. So we have, you know, run books and all that stuff. Not as much in like the mass automation as much as we do try a technique, usually work with the blue team on the other side to explain how it works, do some back and forth, and then do some tuning. So if I was in-house, I would probably use this a lot more to kind of run through things, spot check. We do a lot of knowledge transfer, so I think this doesn't usually work the best for us, but this would save a lot of time, like on an in-house environment.
And when you're like developing for like a new playbook, or when you're, you know, working with a customer or something, does someone on the team like kind of dive through a particular technique and look for variations, or do they find out what's in the wild and run with that, or is it kind of mix of everything too?
So we have a couple people that do like full-time research on detection engineering. So they'll take in, you know, techniques off of Twitter, CTI. We have a whole backlog of attacks that, you know, they're going to work on over time, and then we do, you know, as something comes up. So if somebody drops a new evasion technique or something, we'll pull that back in, and then we land in an interesting spot because a lot of what we do would be going to a client environment, running a technique. If it ends up, you know, they have an event in their sim that we can actually tune array detection for, you know, we'll go there. You know, more often than not, they might be missing a log on an endpoint. So we might jump into like their EDR product and write something custom from there. So that's the one thing that we run into a lot, where trying to be flexible with it's really easy if you're like, hey, all of our clients use Sysmon and we dump everything to the sim, and that's like what we work with, but we try to be flexible enough. So that's why we kind of have the playbooks of, you know, how we would do the attacks, most common variations, and then how we would normally write detections, but then we also go and do some tuning on it as well. I wish it was easier to just,
Awesome.
you know, run through it, but it's been, hey, we have this sim with this EDR and we're not getting these logs, or we are getting these logs and we can enrich them with this. So it's always been a unique combination for everybody we run into.
Yeah, I know, even just like setting up my lab environment, my Sysmon came with like a very generic config, and I was like, oh, let me go look at mod loads, and they weren't being logged, so it's like, okay, like it's not going to help me today, but yeah, that I always joke. I have like I think I tweet it. I attempt to tweet it monthly. My hunt naked Sysmon config.
Yeah, we love Sysmon. The thing is, like, I would say across like all of our client base for the past, I don't know, 5, 6 years, maybe 10 clients that have Sysmon like widely deployed. And I know they're out there. It's just one of those things I think people are like, oh, like, how do we get support for this? Or like, it's so powerful that you really just need to spend the consulting time or the in-house, and it's like tuning everything, getting it where you need it. It's amazing and powerful. It's just, I think, you know, enterprise land is, where's the support contract for this?
Yeah. Don't think they're going to dump that one
No.
anytime soon. Oh, that's fun. Yeah, I kind of went through for MSI exec, and I just like searched the kind of standard channels for like what's out there and quick ones that came up. And I think we talked about HTML smuggling, with MSIs. That was the hot thing, which this tweet was from like December. And I mean, even ISOs and MSIs, and there's MSIs packing and everything at this point.
We talked a little.
And then
So we talked a little bit about the
yeah,
HTML thing before, where it reboots every technique. Like you used to filter your email for extensions, then you're like, oh, okay, cool, we'll filter it at our proxy, and then with HTML smuggling, you see the same things come back around. There, like I thought we handled this 3 or 4 years ago, fixed it, and then here we are again.
yeah, I know 100%. And I know you mentioning it again, I was just like thinking in my head, I was like, yeah, it's even on like if you were inspecting network traffic that well, like actually digging into HTML and pulling out bytes and trying to like trigger on the fact that something's here, it's expensive.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's that part's really hard.
that doesn't. And there's
Right.
also the whole part about right now. So everybody, base 64 encodes whatever the blob is in the HTML. So you're like, well, what if they do some actual kind of encryption and key it off of something on a machine or something somewhere else? You're like, cool, we got a handle on base 64, and now we're like, all right, now they're doing encryption. Here's the next thing. So that's going to be around for a while. It's going to be a hard one to crack.
I think it was on our first Atomics on a Friday, we showed that HTML file or yeah, it was reversed base 64, just, it's like like a little puppy mill, just like trying every little piece and shipping it down range for all these emails and stuff. It's wild.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, conceptually, like, looking at base 64, decoding it, and then just like, looking for the magic bytes at the front of it. Hey, there's a exe or DLL in here. This is scary. Like that makes sense. And then it's like now when you start dealing with all these, alternate use cases of like reverse base 64 and things like that, you said the cost to do that is, just going to grow exponentially.
Yep. And just block them all.
Block all the HTML.
Yeah, just end it at the proxy.
Yeah.
I think I might just go ahead and I'll share up my screen here. We're kind of diving into the ATH stuff here. So specific for ATH MSI exec, the MITRE piece is T1218-007. It's kind of an easy one to remember, and which I really dig. And Red Canary's bird is constantly asking me questions if I want their MDR report, which, by the way, Paul, is not out yet. All right, so this kind of back up a little bit on the ATH piece. This is the initial blog that Red Canary shipped out for it. Speaking of it, I'll drop that in the chat. And this particular blog highlights the reasoning behind a lot of the content. What's the kind of the purpose of ATH, the project itself. Defining sufficient coverage. Great, like ultimately, like awesome questions, like right off the bat, right? Like what optics are associated with this technique, and defenders. Even I would assume even on the offensive side, you think about this, right? As you're building something, like how will somebody find this if we shipped it, right?
Yeah, that's a big one. How common this is actually going to be in an environment. People always find off the wall, like, how I found this extension or I found this thing, and you're like, well, right, but in most places that doesn't actually run. So trying to find the edge cases on the normal stuff, and then how you work back on it, which ties in the MSI piece about all the different directions it can go.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know with like Atomic Red Team, we've always struggled with like showing pass fail or like sufficient technique, like variances or usage with it. And even if you look at I think it was Keith McCammon just shipped a tweet the other day on like kind of like an online little spreadsheet tracker, and like yes or no for detection and whatnot. Like it's always something that we've struggled with the product, the tool itself. And I know Carrie, one of the Atomic maintainers, she's working on a syslog output for it. So when you run your executions, it'll ship it out to Splunk or whatnot, or a SIM logging place.
Yeah, trying to show coverage versus what's happening in the wild versus every edge case is how good should I feel about this, right? Like, we're good for today, tomorrow, next week is
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, so initially when the project came out, it was focused on MSHTA, CHM, and PPID spoofing. And speaking of CHM, you mentioned earlier the MSI being kind of like a package and whatnot. And it reminded me of CHM, where I remember when we were working on this harness, you could like literally embed anything in there. It's just a bunch of, it's just a container, it's like a zip. And I was just like, yeah, I'm surprised we don't see more of CHM, but at the same time, it's like 1999's calling.
Yeah, that like a lot of these techniques are like that. When we started getting back into HTA, I pulled out some book from like 98 or 90, something like that. It was like a security book, and it was like, be careful, watch out for HTA. And I was like, I didn't think that 20 years later we'd be like, HTA is back.
Yep. So good. Oh, it's fun. But all right, so I'm going to kill one browser tab because I definitely have too many open today. I'm going to leave the defer report alone. I'm just going to hop in and jump right into the, how to kind of get started with atomic test harnesses. The obvious thing is there is a wiki page for ATH. Let me just go back here to the top, and to get started is as simple as getting started on Windows, and it is on the PowerShell gallery. So it's as simple as just copying this little one-liner and dropping it into your terminal shell. It'll install all of them, which is really nice. And if you already had it installed or you downloaded it manually and dropped it into your path, you can load it this way too. If you run into any issues or over time, I think I've ran into this maybe twice, but that's just because my ranges are always very kind of all over the place. And then if you want to see what's all in, what you're playing with, you can see similar to what we saw on the repo itself. There's, a bunch of harnesses in here now, and the range is all over. There's a lot of good, awesome things in here. Anytime, I think I tweet this every often, is when the new thing comes out, HTAs or whatever, or CHMs, the new thing being shipped. I always tweet atomic test harnesses, because it's like, hey, if you haven't validated yourself or played with all the variances, this is such a good place to be and good place to play at, because there's just so much in here. All right, I'll try to keep on my regularly scheduled program here. Oh yeah, I know there's so much content. Yeah, so that's the basics of ATH. I do already have it installed, so I'm not going to run through it again. In comparison of what we're going to play with, I wanted to at least show 007 from the Atomic Red Team side. There is, 11 tests in here just for MSI exec. Different variations are in here, like embedded VB script, JScript, a DLL, XE, things like that. So they're just really clean. It makes it easy. And then for the options to play in the different variations of it, you can use these input arguments as a way to modify them live. And I think we've shown this a few times in the past. We do our quick one here. 7. Here's all those. And then I'm just going to run. We'll just go with the first one here. You can prompt for those input arguments just with that TAC prompt for input args, and you can tell it where your MSI exec is. So if you copied it or you want to move it or rename it, it's as simple as that. Similar with your MSI file, if you wanted to play with your own or whatever it may be. And then you have this option to change the MSI action. These are also built into the ATH piece, and I'll show that here too. But they do specifically kind of change the way that these are the command line switches that you'll see like on the command line. So the default is always kind of like I for install, which I think comes out to a Q, not a Q, but I think it comes out to I think it's just /I. And again, remember with Atomic, we don't get much validation here. It's just runs. And if you wanted to know what it does, you could do that show details. And now we know. It runs by default, the kind of like the quiet run, and then the install. And that's what it would look like if you ran it now. So that's that half. Mike, what about ATH? They came for ATH. The simple method to run it is you already installed it, invoke ATH MSI, and this is the default. All harnesses, as far as I know, will have a simple output, simple execution and output built in. So if you just run it, it'll actually just kick this off for you. And this is that validation. Did it work? And there is a true false test success. I mentioned that GUID and what was the script engine and everything like that. It's awesome. Like it's so clean, for validation and whatnot. On your side, Justin, when you work with the customer, do they sometimes ask for a lot of I don't want to say variations, but do they actually want you to hone in on a particular technique, deep down into different variations? I guess I am asking about variations.
So it depends on what side. The red team side, a lot of times they're interested in what we know works and gets by. The purple team side of actually going back and forth, they'll say, hey, what are you guys seeing in the wild for initial code execution techniques that get by this EDR? Okay, let's spend a bunch of time on this file format or this particular branch of techniques. And I think for them, it's using our knowledge of what we know works against the EDRs and things like that to stack that up to where they can get additional coverage. That's a hard thing for a lot of clients because I think that they look at it as, we have a SIM, we have an EDR, we've mashed things together, we got a bunch of custom rules, what still works in between, and let's beat up those areas that so maybe they remap HTA so they never open. So what are we left with? They'll spend a lot of time on trying to make sure that they close those gaps. And people are getting way better at knowing, what and where those are, and then having a conversation around let's just do a deep dive in this thing. What edge cases can you throw at us? What other ways can you run it? Things like that.
From that perspective, do a lot of, I guess that's kind of more purple team in a way, right? Or yeah, do they share the logic ahead of time, what they actually look for, and then you guys can help?
So yeah, so on the purple team side, they'll definitely share what they already know. That's why it's nice having a defensive team that does consulting and an offensive team that does consulting, because we can see what actually works in the wild, what blue teams think is happening, or what they think is the biggest problem or where the biggest gaps are, and kind of merge those together. So on the purple team, clients will definitely share the rules they're currently using, put us in councils, walk through things they've seen, share past reports, stuff like that. On the red team side, it's more of we know you guys do research, we know you have something, let's just try it and validate what we thought was going to work. So we've had clients before that were there's no macros in our environment, and then we fish them and with a macro a couple of years ago, right? And that fires, and they're we thought we had a control for that, and then they find out through change management that they're oh, we rolled back that fix for 70% of our user population. So that level of validation is interesting because you're always assuming that there's no regression in your rule set, so there's no regression in the detections you make, and that tends not to be the case. Somebody might have backed something out because an event happened, and all of a sudden your logs are firing off an alert, for whatever it might be. What else is funny? We've also, on the HTA piece, we've come across clients that are oh, HTA is not a big deal to us, and they were hiring full-time HTA developers at one point, in the past 6-7 years. So we're clearly you guys use these and write them still. So it's interesting seeing different parts of the business not knowing what the rest does, and kind of threading the needle with what detection might work.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a very it's tricky. At one of my prior orgs, it was a M&A type org, and so we would purchase companies, acquire and all that, and it was very much like that. Once they got on our WAN internally, it was very much kind of like Wild West. Like certain groups had different policies versus others. Large companies were, better off in certain type of, policies of prevention, and then others were just, 200 employees startup making things work, right? And yeah,
We run
we had
into
some
a
field.
lot. The big piece there is like a client will call us and want a red team and say they're maybe like a hedge fund or something, and they're small, but they have a good security budget. They have like 400 employees. Like that company is usually multiples harder to break into than, let's say, like a Fortune 50, because of what you mentioned. It's like all the levels of management, all the legacy, all the things to manage. And it's really hard to tell people, hey, like your small company might need more time than this giant company, even though the security staff from one might be, 100 security people on a whole floor at one place and four at the other. A lot of times the places that have four are running, like Sysmon, like they have application allow listing in place, like all of those things. And then they're like, oh, I don't understand why everybody does this. And you're like, if you try rolling that out at any giant company, you're going to very quickly figure out politics and how that's half the job or more than the job, unfortunately.
Yep. Yeah, especially with any kind of app control, you'll find out fast
Yeah.
how many people want to run everything. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I'm just gonna run the get help examples here on the MSI one. This is obviously with everything with ATH. They do have all these examples built in, and you can kind of see some of the different parameters and whatnot in here. The beauty of this tool is that it is obviously very open source, and if you want to dive into what is actually going on behind the scenes, um, Matt and co have done an amazing job with detailing these and showing obviously the parameters here at the beginning. And then as you kind of go down, kind of, I guess in a way where I hang out at is I'm really curious about the different the different parameter settings. And because I always see, again, like we saw earlier, with just like the install admin advertise piece, you can change, script, VB script to J script, things like that. All of this is all in here, which is really cool. And if you're just kind of getting started in ATH type stuff, like it's as simple as, take these examples and just kind of ship it and see what happens, see what it looks like.
It's extremely, like, the hardest thing I think blue teams struggle with is trying to come up with the tradecraft for these things. Like this gives you such a starting point to start, even the basic cases, then fuzzing around. It's not like, hey, I have to go research this technique for, weeks to just replay a single thing. Like the upskilling of knowledge very quickly is a huge piece of this. And that's like the biggest thing we run into is, blue teams are like, what should we focus on? How do we learn this? They're amazing writing detection rules, but like coming up with, the evasions and things like that, even the basic ones of this, is just something that people don't want to invest the time in, and rightfully so. Like it's just, you're worried about the output taking, trying to tie it all back in.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. And kind of the neat thing as well about these is if you, as a lot of defenders do, is, we see the CTI reports, we see that, good example right here. We know that by kind of scouring through like a deeper report, we see the basics right here. We got the /I, we see the /QN, and a lot of logic is just written on look for /I's and /QNs, right? Like maybe it's normal in my environment every day. And you have to do that simple filtering, SCCM, constantly running MSI exec, whatever, you filter out those parent procs and kind of go down the line. And that's where I think a lot of with ATH, it kind of helps us just say like, okay, it's not always /I QNs, and kind of very much just segued myself right into what this looks like in as far as the logging perspective goes. So let me run one more atomic. Let me go back up here to the actual T1218.007. This is just the atomic test side of things. So if you wanted to run all of them, you just power through that one, kicks them all down range. Got all our goodies. And then the hope is that in the last 24 hours, somebody did something, which a little too much something. So I broke it out into parent proc, parent command line, because there's some things, and then the process name and that process command line data. And what I wanted to show was that, we talked about the /I and the Qs and things like that, and QNs and everything we get from CTI. Here's those variances. And this is the part where it gets tricky with MSIs. What we see in like reports is this may not be always C Windows installer. It's going to be app data local, dropping temp files, and then /Vs. And so like these dash embeddings with random GUIDs and whatnot, like it gets really hard to like generate this type of content. And then if it's embedded with something else and it trampolines not spawning off of MSI exec, I always think about like that stuff as like, if we're not looking for, hopefully we're looking for MSI exec spawning something outside of spawning itself. But like, where did it go? Where did it, cross process type events? Where did it end up going to inject or do something else? And I don't know. How do you, as far as your MSI execing goes, Justin, what other fun little tricks have you guys kicked off on that kind of stuff?
Yeah, before the show, we talked about this a little bit. It was, you can create directories, you can edit registry settings, and then you can go and, make it install some other signed benign thing. So along the way, you're like, hey, I made an MSI installer that installs putty, whatever it might be, but it set some registry key that then let me do something else. So that was the thing that we're talking about. This can go in so many directions that it's like, that's why you're seeing MSI pop up. It's such a common thing. And then it's which behavior am I tracking down? Which is good, which is common. The extra behaviors you can do where you can do post install activity of run JScript or VB script. It's like, this is packaging up, a whole pile of tradecraft you've seen into something that is, like you can see in the screen, it's hard to track what direction it's going. So it's another way to reboot things that have already been done, pretty extensively.
From what you've seen, is it outside? So what do you think more common? Do you see like an MSI file like coming in via like an HTML smuggling, or is it like second stage it downloads like through PowerShell and then they run it that way? What do you think more?
So I would probably use this as the pretext of, hey, there's a VPN update or something like that. Like just go straight away to MSI, HTML. But like, I know that seems basic, and that stuff still works. Like on the red team side, we'll do a lot where we call people, SMS text message people first, things like that. When you combine that trust and then like the workflow for like an MSI installer, if you're expecting to install something, it's not like open a Word document, click enable, spin around 3 times, click this content. Like this is an expected behavior that people have been trained to click, run. Hey, it's doing the thing I thought. Walk away. I feel good. So that's a big piece of this, is that everybody's installed software. Like everybody who's touched Windows has seen, what that looks like. There's some stuff behind the scenes we've done with MSI too, where do like silent installs out of another tool. We've seen instances where, tradecraft gets caught, using a certain technique. If you wrap that same technique in an MSI, it would break the detections that maybe like an EDR product had, because it just can't seem to handle, hey, we wrote a directory, we wrote another directory, we installed something that was signed by Microsoft. That's cool. We changed some registry keys. Hey, we don't care. And then something else happens, or, schedule tasks and things like that. There's so much you can do. And I think the balancing between, so many things in defense are, is this a good action or a bad action? You're scrambling a number of activities that could be very suspicious or could be completely common. So sticking something in the middle, I think, is going to be, keeping MSIs alive for quite some time.
Ooh. Sorry. Got a barge in. Yeah, he's like, hey, why are you not playing Minecraft with me right now? So funny. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. That's very interesting. It very much, it just reminds me of HTA so much, and I don't know why. I remember a couple times we would catch like a red team. They would begin kind of with the whole like, legal, give us your creds kind of at the end, HTA, HTML file. And it would just, post out to this website, but inbound, it's just an HTML file coming in, or HTA, and they click it and read the legal doc or whatever it might be, the latest, revision to their medical information for the company, and then they post out to that website. Very much kind of reminds me of that. Then the second stage is VPN.
We did a ton of that, like in years back, where we would do like HTA surveys, be like, oh, this year for reviewing the company, we want to win an award. Can you guys fill out this survey? And it would be like the first thing would just be a login page or whatever, and then just walk them through. And that behavior, it's expected. And whatever it closes out, it doesn't run anything. We kind of got into the payload thing after that, where you could do like deserialized payloads and have them load. There was some area there where, like, depending on how you loaded JScript, you could avoid AMC at one point. There's just there is so much surface there. That's same feeling with this. There's so many directions you can take this that are probably not areas of great coverage right now that are going to get flushed out over time, especially now that you pushed people off of macros, and people are really big into chaining 75 link files and everything possible under the sun to get to a certain point. So
yep. Yeah, I sent Paul my HTML, zip, OneNote, MSI the other day.
I know.
He's not here
you
to
see
defend
these
himself,
and you're like, who does this? And you're like, well, it obviously works because it's still happening. And it's just like, to see this, and you're like, so you got somebody to go through 7 steps of running this, and you're like, this is really a technical problem. Like, people are gonna do whatever you tell them to do. So we need to fix this on our side. It's never going to be the, don't click this thing, or, hover over the link as the magic, savior to prevent bad things from happening.
I know my favorite is like, here's the password. You open the HTA, there's the password. And that's so good.
Yeah.
Mount, launch, password. Yeah, it's glorious. Yeah, so this is where this quick one here is this on image loads, event code 7 from Sysmon. I mentioned earlier how my Sysmon config was not configured for this. Very much, a lot of EDRs may limit the amount of mod loads that they collect into their product. And I think it was recent, Elastic showed kind of like the core set that they go for, and I know some other vendors they do limit the amount that they like would alert on or trigger on, things like that. It's definitely a thing out there. It's extremely voluminous. Like, there's so many mod loads happening, and I mentioned Hunt Naked. Obviously, you would never deploy this Sysmon config in a loaded environment, a real 10,000 endpoint org, because it's just chaos. But I mean, it's awesome for me. Thank you, little tiny computer lab of 3 that I can do this. But in this particular case, you mentioned AMSI, and like, even when we run these particular MSI tests, like, first thing I thought was like, oh, like, it's going to absolutely load up JScript or even like VB. These load up, and AMSI's in here too, and because of PowerShell being spawned and whatnot. And there was another one. I think it was MS Core and MSITLL, obviously, for its kind of standard day-to-day. These are really fun to hunt on. And do you see many orgs like dig into these when on an engagement or anything, and ask any questions about mod loads? Or
not really. It comes up from time to time, but it's not a super big one. More people are focused on like, um, they'll be like, "Oh, we saw your payload import bcrypt or something like that," like on the actual
Yeah.
like exe DLL side of like imports that side, but not too much on the hunting side. I know it comes up, but it's noisy. Like you really have to know what's going on because there's
Yeah.
so much there.
Yeah. It's yeah. It can be a little much. And I used to love, especially at Red Canary, because we had so much telemetry, like digging into AMSI DLL, loading in like non-standard processes is such a neat way to find that random tradecraft or random applications doing weird things that make no sense. I don't
Yeah,
know what this
it's
one
like
is.
telemetry overload these days. I think that where, defense and offense, like offense for the longest time was, hey, let's just go to this area where there's no coverage, right? Like, oh, there's a scripting language they can't see into it. Okay, cool. So like Microsoft's been shining lights on all these different areas, and now it's like, okay, in offense, now where is the light, but where is all the noise? And I think that defenders probably have a leg up now and in the coming years because we're not collecting telemetry from your entire fleet and then taking it home and saying, all right, let me look at this for a month and decide these are the places to live. Like you could have an MSI file, like you said, like SCCM or something, right? Like you guys allow us that, like there's no alerts, but going into it, I'm not going to know that that's the one MSI exe that you guys fire on a regular basis. So there's some stuff there. And we have clients kind of sometimes tell us those things and they'll say, hey, we have a, a gap in our coverage because we have to allow this thing. We're just going to tip you off because you might figure that out over some time. So we want to build some deeper controls around it. So, try going down this path. And yeah, the collaborative piece has been a lot nicer. It always used to be like, we're not going to tell you anything. And we'd be like, okay, cool. Can we find that out if we send like 2 fishes or talk to someone on the phone? They're like, probably. And we're like, well, let's just make the best use of our time. And, like we'll be forward with you and share what we're going to try. Let's just, work together and back and forth. And it's definitely kind of changed with red teaming versus years back. They're like, we're telling you nothing. Get in here and then get to this, and we would do it, and they'd be like, all right, maybe we should team up on this. So
That is awesome. Oh, that's fun. Kind of shift gears. We're hitting 43 minutes, but I want to talk a little bit about service creates. This was a Paul request. I told him I wasn't going to do anything on it because he's not here, but it's his lucky day. He hasn't messaged yet. He's not in any of the channels, but so Atomic Test Harness has another one, service creates, and I think I've talked about this. I think we've talked about this before on Atomics on a Friday. I think we talked about it a lot on Twitter when here he is. When some new adversary starts shipping drivers and things like that. Yes, he is. Okay, he's excited. I was gonna go like on this crazy deep dive for CTI of like, oh, let's find this and that, and I was just like, like there's a decent amount of like just like a source of stuff on MITRE's website for T1543003, and then I remembered the other one. I think I talked about this in a press of I did last year for hunting drivers was the Daxon campaign. I just my favorite part of like that clickbait right there is most advanced piece of malware sample. Some malware semantic has research I've seen from a China link group, and I was like, oh, that's awesome. It's so clicky. But yeah, drivers. Are you guys using drivers much out there, Justin, or is it pretty?
So we do some research in it. We've done some work around it. It's one of those things where we were talking about this more, and it was kind of like a chicken and egg thing where we would normally already need RCE, so we've probably got in a good place to not be detected. So like if we were talking about down the line, would we need to use drivers to maybe blind EDR products after we already had access? So today, most people know this is if you can get code execution on a box, you can turn it into a SOX proxy and a lot of the time avoid a lot of the EDR products alerts, or you're not running PowerShell to query LDAP and things like that. You're just proxying traffic across it. And for whatever reason, EDR products really didn't go down the route of like behavior, network traffic, like analytics and baselining and things like that. ATP does it a little bit. Like if you inject into Outlook and then like dump all of LDAP, it'll be like, hey, Outlook never dumps all of LDAP. But across the board, that's like a really good detection technique because people will get stuff running and getting around an EDR to maybe have it not see what's happening in that process these days, because that's pretty common. People move to beacon object files and just some other techniques to stay inside that process, use Windows APIs, do normal things. It used to be, hey, I want to do this. Let's spawn command.exe. Let's spawn PowerShell. So now you're like, well, what does this one process that's usually process hallowed actually do? And what's the network traffic look like? So yeah, we're trying to use it. We're just trying to find the most, normal cases for it. And then the other thing is do we really want to install a vulnerable driver on a client system to make it more vulnerable? Is that something we want to do? So there's a lot of drivers out there that have, bad filtering for just different commands you can run. So it's not like we're installing something that has like a memory issue. We're going to corrupt that. It's usually they're filtering, like as a low level user, you can dump memory from a process or kill some other process, things like that. So it's a piece that we're going down. It's just we haven't quite locked into the return on the the use cases for it.
Yeah, I think about it like I think someone asked me, is like, why would an adversary use drivers? And I always just think persistence, I didn't think about it from like an EDR evasion perspective. Because like you said, if you already have like admin on a box or in an environment, why drop drivers?
I figured it's such a rare event. Like it's not like your user base isn't like, oh, I need to install this driver from 1998, and you're like, cool, but we don't use Bitdefender or whatever old vulnerable driver that might be floating around with something. So it's like, it makes a lot of sense if you get to a point where EDR stuff gets a lot better, where you have to fight it at a different level. But right now, it's like it worked for some APT groups. Cool. Like if we had a really good use case, and it's like, but normally the process is basically just get on a box. You've done something to the process to unhook it, maybe broke ETW or whatever. Okay, the process you're living in is fairly quote unquote safe. What else do I need to do? And it's usually get off that box and get to a goal. So it's like, how much does this actually give me to do something fancy? And I always tell people, like, you don't get extra hacker points for burning tradecraft on being an ATP group or like being anything, right? Like no client's gonna be like, oh man, you burned all this tradecraft on this thing, like congratulations, did you get to the goal? And we're like, well, the fixes are still X, Y, and Z, regardless of how crazy and off the wall we did. So it's like, what's the return on that for most people?
Yeah, those are some excellent points. That is really interesting. I'm just trying to like, I just don't remember ever anybody saying like, oh yeah, we dropped, we're bringing in all these drivers or whatever, just to like show or whatnot.
You see it on the ransomware side has done it to drop a vulnerable driver to kill an AV product that they couldn't fight with to then run ransomware. So that use case makes a lot of sense, right? Like if you can't kill some protected process, but you can from a driver, right? Then you can fight it and kill it and go from there. But it's like that's what they're doing. So that's the end goal of their thing. Our red team is usually more tactical about trying to steal something, but the ransomware piece is always a question people ask. So it's I think this, if all you had to fight was common AV and your end goal is ransoming, I think this is a good play. If your end goal is anything beyond that, then there's probably not a lot of use right now. I'm sure somebody will come up with some case that makes a lot more sense. But I had been talking a lot about this the past week with like a team of people, just trying to figure out, how do we want to use this? Where do we want to go? And that's also, the industry is trending this way and detection is trending this way. Do we want to jump on this train right now and see what we can get out of it? Or do we wait and see where it gets? And then when people forget about it, circle back around and breathe some new life into it. So that's, trying to make the best use of your time.
Yep. Yeah, I was just thinking, even from like a defender perspective, like, oh, like I would love for someone to test loading up a driver in my environment. Like, do we actually have coverage for or visibility into that happening across the fleet? And, if one endpoint brings a new driver in, does anybody know? Right. And
And then if you do alert on it, you find out that, it's really common or not common. I'd imagine this is probably not as common on new machines, and you could probably drill down pretty specifically. So that was the other reason we were kind of debating on how far to go with it, because it's like, if you have a good handle, you already have telemetry on all these pieces, like, is this actually an event that happens? Pretty much, like, let's get some more data about that from talking to customers and just different people, see if it's something that happens all the time, and if there's actually any space to do this, or if it's just going to be like, hey, we did it, super obvious, everything lit up red and lights went off and the box got quarantined, and then we're like, well, we tried. So
yeah, the color's green. Okay, Paul has showed up today. His first question: what about using it for data manipulation?
that's fair. I'm trying to figure out, like, what we would need. So I guess if there was some, like, EDR database or something we were trying to overwrite that was locked or something like that. I was trying to think. We don't get into a ton of, like, actually having to, like, break things in a weird way to get around them. So that's why I said I knew somebody would have some use cases that make complete sense. It's like you really just need a big sounding board to be like, well, what about this thing? And you're like, oh, makes perfect sense for that.
Yeah. Yep. Very interesting. Let me flip. Let see what other. Okay. I'll run through the last little bit of the ATH demo, and hopefully that font is big enough. We'll go bigger. But yeah, I'm just gonna showcase kind of the next one here, which is the Service Create test harness. This one's under 1543003, and this one is a lot more detailed. I think it was Jonathan Johnson, who shared this one or put this one into the repo, and there's a lot going on. And a spot where I kind of like ended up at this morning was like, okay, how do I like actually use this thing? It's been a hot minute, but it starts with creating a new service, which is the new ATH service. And the cool part, obviously, it's very detailed in all the parameters. As far as variations go, I thought this was really neat. It is built in. The defaults, your standard service create, drop in sc.exe, WMI, there's the registry, and then just standard Win32 APIs, which I think is really cool. As far as like defenders go, it allows for like digging through your data and like finding which ones did it. Like, where'd this thing come from? I always think of like, how'd this pop here? I remember a thing that they would always drop on us at Red Canary was all these things don't just happen in a vacuum. It's like you can't just run an atomic test and expect us to detect it. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. I remember that so vividly. Paul knows. And then I mentioned our output. So it will have some nice output here. Let me just run it. Let's just do it live. So first I'll just do the get help in a vacuum. Dumps everything that we were just looking at, all the parameters. And then here's your output example. I was geeking out on this earlier, so I got a lot of like messed up. I can't run these again basically because I already ran them. But I will add some changes to my notes, and then we can ship it again. Okay, cool. So I have a Mimikatz driver sitting on my desktop. Let's see if I can paste. And I'm just going to tell it to load up as a new one. Just pasted that. So we're going to use the Win32 own process service type. Attempt to start it using WMI variant, loading the Mimi driver, and I gave it a name, not here, not APT. So you run that, we'll get an output. It may error. Nope, we're good. It was successful. And so it didn't start, which is totally fine. But you do get these reg mods and that image path here for that service. And instead of like running 10 more of these, I wanted to at least show what I did earlier. We'll run it again. You'll see hopefully the new one here. Yep, not APT. So this is event code 7045. There was I was Googling because there was another one. It's in my notes here. It's 4697. And there's full length blogs on the differences between the two. And I was like, wow, I didn't know the difference. I'll have to find it and share it, but it was kind of interesting. And I've always liked 7045. I thought it always did a decent job at telling me what's up. But apparently the other one kind of does the same thing. So I guess it's choose your new service installed event log. And then in particular, if you want to look at the raw here, you got, everything you kind of wish for, the service name, the type, things like that. All of that's in here. And then flipping back, I'm just going to change it here, but you can see the path to it and that service name. And I always think if you were collecting this across a fleet, you would look at 7045 or the other one and kind of look for any new drivers being loaded or in particular kernel drivers, which is that other variation. And where's it at? Let me kill this one. I got a copy paster over here. Somewhere. Okay, I don't have it on hand. Oh yeah, there it is, service type. So this is the fun part, doing it live. You can cycle through these, obviously, with your tab completion. There's your kernel driver. I'm just going to change the variant as well. See, and then we have to change the name because Windows doesn't like it when you have multiples named the same. Give it a display name. So if you were looking at it through a list, you might kind of be able to pick out which ones are good or bad. I always enjoy it. If you were doing a driver list and the service name is a KB from Microsoft, a legit KB. Those are my favorite. I think I've only ever seen a red team or somebody, maybe an adversary named KB something, and it was yeah, we'll never catch that.
Sometimes that's all it takes. You just got to get past tier 1 and close that ticket out.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Even though it failed, we still got that telemetry, and I'll refresh. I think I already have the sc.exe one here. So I can run that, and then for kicks, we have all of these in here too from earlier, but you'll see our KB being started because, yeah, it's easy. Kernel module, things like that. So it's neat, very neat, having it all in one place. And then when I was messing with it, my sysmon config is obviously pretty wide open here. So as far as registry mods go, you can see kind of that, what they call target object. This is that service being created in current control set under services. And then if it had any, I think it shows the value. Yeah, local system. I think if you click on the drop over here, you'll be able to see all the different value names that they create for a new service. So yeah, it's a lot of content. So, and yeah, Paul dropped a note. EDRs need to start collecting registry values, and yeah,
registry is a tough one. We've definitely seen where updating a key versus creating a net new key has been a path to evasion, creating it blank or just with a value that's benign that they don't care about, and then updating it later. There's a lot there that EDR struggles with, and that's but there's so much value there if tracking stuff like this back down.
Yeah, I didn't think about updating a key. That's really cool.
It was just the way things alert on it was just different. We've seen it with I think it was in Microsoft ATP where places had a rule for creating a new registry key for something. If we created it but it was blank, they were you're just any value that wasn't something bad that they were expecting, then went back and they didn't care.
That is cool. That is really cool. Yeah, I've seen there was a red team that would just they would update the scheduled task, and because it wasn't like full, creating a new scheduled task, it was just updating that it would just
Yeah.
everywhere. Nobody would know that tree falling in the woods. There's our demo, which our animation doesn't work, which is really sad. We always try to do mitigations, Justin, because we go through all this stuff and we're like, yeah, like how would you defend yourself? Detect or prevent. And so I jotted a fast list, and some of the things obviously we were running that I guess I didn't dive enough into on the back end of ATH and whatnot, but a lot of it can be tracked through script block logging. Even just like there are ways to create a service through just PowerShell by default. So they're just commandlets there. So if you were logging the script block, you would catch a lot of these things. The simple EDR or sysmon 4688 talked a little bit about service creates and mod load fun stuff, but which is a lot. I threw all the buzzwords for prevention. Do you have any interesting prevention techniques, either for service creates or things you've ran into that?
The app control thing is the one thing that always works, right? It's what it's how much you want to invest in it. It's for the time being, you're going to deal with MSIs and so many other things. It's like it's the one, it's not easy. So
yep.
And Microsoft fixed their driver blocking now, but I think that's going to be it gets abused. We add to the list updates, it doesn't work. So, but Windows 11 has a lot of strong things in that area too. So it's going to be, it's always a trade-off to see what gets turned off in enterprise environments in their like golden image versus, hey, there's 30 new security features. Because at one point I thought the app container like isolation, the sandbox thing was going to be the next big thing that everybody goes to, like sandboxing Office and stuff like that. And they kind of went a different direction with macro blocking and stuff like that. So it's always hard to get a read on what's going to work for enterprises versus these are great on my home PC or my super lockdown, I'm paranoid about the world setup. So time will tell.
Yeah, I know. I know we didn't talk about it, but you mentioned even like the MSIX stuff that came up recently too. And
yeah. So we talked about that a bit on before we got here. We were saying that the MSIX, had to be signed, but they made a flag in it where you could not sign it for testing purposes. So that kind of went around Twitter already, as a potential path to abuse. And then we started running down like MSI versus MSIX, and there's a lot of plus sides to the MSIX. But again, MSI is going to be around because, we have to support legacy for some time. So, 10, 15 years.
I know, another 10, 15 years. Are you seeing a lot of Windows 11 out there, or is it still pretty 10 and under?
It's pretty much 10 and under still. I wouldn't say under. I would say it's still Windows 10. I don't think too many people have pushed into Windows 11. Usually, every other Microsoft release is good. So with Windows 10 being good, maybe Windows 11 won't be. But it's kind of like Windows 10 plus plus. It's not like I don't know. It wasn't like a drastic shift, right? So
yeah. Yep, 10 plus plus. I like that. That's awesome. Yeah, I can't. The only other interesting one I thought was, I think it's ASR, the attack surface reduction one, that has even like an audit mode. I think it's valuable. And I think someone wrote, I think Sigma rules for it, at least as far as those event logs go. I have to double check, but the event logs for it are pretty good for Defender, for organization, if you want to enable an audit mode and like track, what's happening across those different tools. It's kind of a neat one.
Yeah, I've run it like on my home PC, like no major issues, minus the shortcut deletion thing from a few weeks ago. They had a small bug that ate a bunch of shortcuts, but I mean that's not a big deal. But yeah, ASR, like the availability of having those features, like even if you don't like the spawning, child processes out of Office and stuff, there's a lot of good you can get from that. There's I they we published some of the baked in rule set. So like as an attacker, we've been able to take a look at like the exemptions that they put across the board. But for most people, like there's a ton of, I mean, you're going to knock up most of the commodity stuff you see off the table with it.
Yeah, that's the word, is you can easily knock out the commodity stuff, which is a couple simple ASRs, which could be useful. Yeah, it's awesome. Well, I'll drop the rest of the links and on our Git repo and tweet things and have it going. But Justin, I really appreciate you joining today.
Appreciate being on. It was a good time.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's it for today, everybody. I hope that was interesting. Lots of content. This is live, obviously, so this will be on the YouTubes and wherever else it saves it. And we'll catch up again soon. Thank you again.
Thank you.